Close your eyes for a second and think about the last time you tried to speak English. Maybe it was at work. Maybe it was with a native speaker. Maybe it was in a class or in a store or on a phone call or in a meeting where everyone was looking at you and waiting. And maybe, just like millions of other learners around the world, something happened in that moment that you wish had not happened. You froze. Not because you did not know English, not because you had not studied, not because you were not smart enough or dedicated enough or serious enough about learning. You froze because in that one critical moment, when the words needed to come out of your mouth and form themselves into something clear and confident and understandable, they simply did not. The sentence you had been forming in your head just seconds before disappeared completely. The word you knew perfectly well in your native language suddenly had no English equivalent that you could locate anywhere inside your mind. Your mind went blank, your heart started beating faster, your face got warm. And then came that feeling, that heavy, sinking, familiar feeling of disappointment in yourself. Again, sound familiar? If it does, I want you to know something right now, before we go any further. That moment, that freeze, that terrible silence where your English should have been, has almost nothing to do with your grammar. It has almost nothing to do with how many words you have memorized. It has almost nothing to do with your intelligence, your dedication, your study habits, your textbooks, your teacher, or how many years you have been learning. It has everything to do with one single thing that almost every English learner in the world is doing wrong. One thing, and today on the Speaking Momentum channel, we are going to name it, face it, and fix it. My name is not what matters right now. What matters is what you are about to learn. Because in the next hour or so, I am going to walk you through 10 chapters, 10 powerful, carefully constructed ideas that are going to completely and permanently change the way you think about speaking English. Not just theoretically, practically, in a way that you can start using today as soon as this video is over. This is not a grammar lesson. I am not going to ask you to memorize verb tenses or conjugation tables. I am not going to test you on prepositions or subject-verb agreement. I am not going to give you a list of vocabulary words to write in a notebook and study before bed tonight. What I am going to do is something far more valuable than any of that. I am going to show you how the human brain actually acquires a spoken language, not how schools teach you to learn a language, not how textbooks say it works, how it actually biologically, neurologically works. And once you understand that, you will see immediately and clearly why everything most learners do is working against them and what they should be doing instead. I am going to show you what native speakers never had to think about that you are thinking about constantly, and why that difference, that one cognitive difference, is the single biggest reason your English is not flowing the way you want it to, the way you know it should. And I am going to show you how to build what this channel is entirely dedicated to, what I call speaking momentum, that unstoppable, natural, forward-moving energy that fluent speakers have, that quality of speech where one word leads to the next, and the sentence just arrives complete and the conversation flows and you are in it, fully in it, not watching yourself from the outside with growing anxiety, but actually there, communicating, connecting, present. Most English learners never develop that momentum. Not because they cannot, but because nobody ever showed them how. Because the entire system, the textbooks, the schools, the apps, the courses, is built around a model of language learning that has almost nothing to do with the way real spoken language actually works. 95% of English learners around the world are studying in a way that makes speaking harder, not easier, every single year. They are memorizing rules that they cannot access under the pressure of real conversation. They are translating from their native language in their heads, adding a crucial and crippling delay to every response they try to form. They are waiting, always waiting, until their English is good enough, perfect enough, before they dare open their mouths and try. They are treating a living, breathing, beautiful spoken language like a written exam that they need to study for before they are allowed to participate. And the 5% who actually speak with confidence, who respond naturally and quickly, who hold conversations with ease, who never seem to panic when they cannot find a word, who laugh and joke and connect in English the way they do in their own language, they are not more gifted. They are not born with some special language gene. They simply discovered, either by accident or by design, or through sheer desperate necessity, a completely different approach to the problem. And that approach is what this video is about. This whole video, start to finish, every chapter. So if you are ready, and I hope you are, if you are genuinely, seriously ready to stop endlessly studying English and start actually speaking it, then stay with me through every chapter of this video, because what comes next is going to change everything. Let us begin. Chapter 1, why your brain freezes when you speak English, and how to stop it forever. Every single English learner at every single level, from complete beginner to advanced, has experienced the freeze, that terrifying, humiliating, seemingly inexplicable moment when your mouth is open, someone is looking at you, waiting for you to say something, and absolutely nothing comes out. Not because you do not want to speak, not because you have given up, but because your brain has, in that critical moment, simply stopped functioning the way you need it to. Most learners experience this freeze and draw the most obvious conclusion available to them. They think, I do not know enough English yet. I need to study more. I need to learn more vocabulary. I need to understand the grammar better. And so they go back to their books. They download a new app. They sign up for another course. They dedicate another month, another year, to studying more, knowing more, understanding more. And then the next time they try to speak English in a real situation, the freeze happens again. So they study more, and the freeze happens again. And this cycle, this deeply frustrating and deeply common cycle, can go on for years, even decades, without ever meaningfully improving. And the reason it never improves is that more studying does not solve the problem. Because the problem was never a lack of knowledge. The problem is something else entirely. Here is what is actually happening inside your brain in the moment of the freeze, explained in plain language. When you attempt to speak a second language, your brain is trying to do several very complex cognitive operations simultaneously. It is trying to process and understand what was just said to you by another person, which involves phonological decoding, semantic comprehension, and pragmatic interpretation all at once. It is trying to figure out what you want to say in response, which involves accessing your intentions, your knowledge, your opinions. It is trying to locate the right words in English, which involves searching through your mental lexicon under time pressure. It is trying to arrange those words in the correct order according to English grammar, which involves applying complex syntactic rules on the fly. It is monitoring your pronunciation and trying to produce sounds that differ from your native language's phonological system. And it is managing or trying to manage your emotional state, your anxiety, your fear of making a mistake, your fear of sounding foolish, your fear of being judged or laughed at or dismissed. That is an extraordinary amount of simultaneous mental processing. And the human brain, as magnificent and complex as it is, has a limited amount of what cognitive psychologists call working memory, or cognitive working capacity. Working memory is the mental space where conscious processing happens. When too many complex operations compete for space in working memory at the same time, the whole system slows down, it stalls, and sometimes it crashes completely, like a computer that has too many programs running at once. That crash is the freeze. That is what you feel when your English disappears. Now here is the crucial part, the part that changes everything. In your native language, almost none of this processing happens consciously. When you speak your mother tongue, you are not aware of retrieving words. You are not consciously choosing grammatical structures. You are not translating from some internal language of thought into your native language. You are not monitoring your pronunciation. You are just speaking. The words arrive, the sentences form, the language comes out the way breathing comes out, automatically, continuously, without visible mental effort. That automatic, unconscious, effortless fluency is what linguists call procedural knowledge. It is knowledge that has been practiced and repeated and internalized so deeply over so many thousands of repetitions across your entire lifetime that it no longer requires conscious attention to operate. It runs below the level of awareness. It is in the background, like the operating system of a computer, doing its work invisibly while your consciousness focuses on other things, on what you want to say, on the person you are talking with, on the ideas you are trying to express. Now contrast that with how most English learners have stored their English. What most learners have is something entirely different. What they have is called declarative knowledge, They know about English. They can describe the rules of English grammar. They can explain, when given enough time in a quiet room, when to use the present perfect versus the simple past. They can write a grammatically correct sentence if you give them 5 minutes and a piece of paper. They can recognize errors in English text. They understand English intellectually, analytically, consciously. But under the pressure of real-time spoken conversation, when there is no time to think, when the other person is looking at them, waiting, when the clock in the social situation is ticking in a way that is almost physical in its pressure, declarative knowledge is far too slow. The conscious, step-by-step processing of declarative knowledge cannot keep pace with the required speed of conversation. It is like trying to win a Formula One race in a car that needs to stop every 100 meters to consult a manual. The freeze happens because speaking English is still, for most learners, a fully conscious, laborious, slow, effortful process. Every word must be consciously located. Every sentence must be consciously assembled. Every pronunciation must be consciously checked. There is nothing automatic. There is nothing procedural. There is only this enormous, exhausting, conscious effort that simply cannot be sustained at conversational speed. And the solution, the real solution, the only solution that actually works, is not to add more to your declarative knowledge. It is to convert what you already know about English into procedural knowledge. To move the English you have studied from the slow, effortful, conscious part of your brain into the fast, automatic, unconscious part. Here is the fundamental insight of this entire video, and I want you to hold it and remember it and return to it throughout everything we discussed today. Fluency is not about knowing more. Fluency is about making what you already know automatic. Read that again. Let it land. Right now, most learners are pursuing a strategy that goes wider, more vocabulary, more grammar rules, more topics, more knowledge, more input from more sources, wider and wider and wider. But the path to speaking fluency actually goes deeper. It goes deeper into the language you already have. Practicing it, repeating it, using it in context, under pressure, in different situations, with different people and different topics, until it becomes automatic, until it becomes procedural, until it no longer requires conscious attention, until it just flows. A beginner who has deeply, repeatedly, automatically internalized 500 words and 100 common conversational phrases will consistently outperform in real spoken conversation an advanced learner who has studied 5,000 words but made none of them automatic, because in the moment of actual speaking, only what is automatic is accessible at full speed. Everything conscious is too slow. This is genuinely counterintuitive. It goes completely against the grain of how we were all taught languages in school, where more is always more. But it is true, and the science of language acquisition has supported it for decades. So what does this mean for your practice starting today? It means that before you learn anything new in English, you need to deepen what you already have. Every word you already recognize needs to become a word you can produce automatically. Every phrase you understand when you read it needs to become a phrase you can deploy instantly in speech. Every grammar pattern you know intellectually needs to become a speaking habit, something your mouth does without your brain having to manage it. That conversion from conscious to automatic happens through a very specific kind of practice, not reading, not flashcards, not grammar exercises, speaking practice, active producing out loud in real-time speaking practice, saying things, saying them again, saying them in different contexts, saying them faster, saying them under slight pressure, building the neural pathways in your brain that connect intention to language to sound until those pathways are so well worn that the signal travels along them in an instant. This is where fluency lives. Not in textbooks, not in knowledge, in the automatic, below conscious level spoken habits of your brain and mouth working together. Everything else in this video is about how to build those habits, so keep listening. Chapter 2, the massive mistake that almost every English learner makes. There is one mistake so common, so universal, so deeply embedded in the global culture of English education that almost every learner is making it right now at this very moment without being remotely aware of it. And this single mistake is responsible directly or indirectly for more frustration, more wasted time, more broken confidence, more years of studying without progress, and more abandoned dreams of speaking English fluently than any other factor in the entire landscape of language learning. The mistake is treating studying English as the same thing as practicing English. Now, I know what you are thinking. Is there a difference? Is not all the time I spend with English basically the same? Is not reading a textbook, watching a lesson, reviewing vocabulary, completing exercises, all of that the same as practicing? It is not. The difference is enormous. The difference is everything. Understanding this distinction, deeply and truly understanding it, will do more for your English fluency than any course or textbook or app you have ever used. Studying is a passive receiving activity. When you study English, you are a receiver of information flowing from some external source into your brain. You read a grammar explanation and that explanation flows in. You watch a video where someone explains the difference between since and for, and that explanation flows in. You look up the definition of the word ambiguous in a dictionary and the definition flows in. You highlight sentences in a textbook. You take notes on conjugation tables. You review flashcards. You listen to someone else speaking English while you sit still, relaxed, in no danger, absorbing. All of those activities feel productive. They produce a comfortable sensation that learning is happening. After a good study session, you feel as though you have accomplished something. And in one narrow, limited sense you have added information to your brain. New connections have been formed, new facts have been encoded, new understanding has been built. But information is not fluency, knowledge is not speaking ability, understanding is not production. And the part of your brain that stores studied information is a completely different part from the part of your brain that generates spontaneous spoken language under time pressure. Real practicing is an active producing activity. When you practice English, you are the one doing the work of language generation. You are making your mouth form sounds. You are constructing sentences in real time with no template to follow. You are experiencing the actual cognitive and emotional pressure of trying to communicate, the gap between what you want to say and what you can say, and navigating that gap as best you can. You are making mistakes and continuing. You are finding words or not finding them and dealing with it. You are managing the anxiety and the pace and the flow of actual communication. When you practice, you are building the neural infrastructure of speaking. When you study, you are populating a database that your speaking infrastructure may or may not be able to access quickly enough to use. Here is a question that will reveal the truth about your current approach instantly. In the past week, how many hours did you spend studying English? Reading about it, watching lessons, reviewing vocabulary, taking notes, listening to explanations from a teacher or a YouTube channel? Now answer this honestly. In that same past week, how many hours did you spend actually speaking English? Not listening to English, not reading about English, actually opening your mouth and producing English sentences out loud in real time to yourself, to another person, to a recording device, anywhere, in any context. For the overwhelming majority of English learners, the first number is much larger than the second, often dramatically larger. I have spoken to learners who spend 15, 20, 30 hours a week consuming English content, reading, listening, watching, and less than 1 hour a week actually speaking. And then they wonder, sincerely and without any self-awareness of the irony, why they cannot speak. You cannot learn to speak by studying speaking any more than you can learn to drive by reading a manual about driving. At some point, you have to get behind the wheel. At some point, you have to put your hands on the controls and let the car move and deal with what happens. And the manual that you studied, all that declarative knowledge, might help you a little in the beginning, give you some orienting framework, but it is the actual driving that teaches you to drive. Only the driving. Imagine someone who decided they wanted to become a professional musician. And imagine that person spent 3 years reading books about music theory. They studied harmony and counterpoint and rhythm and form. They memorized the circle of fifths. They read biographies of great composers. They watched master classes by concert pianists. They analyzed the structure of symphonies. They understood music in the abstract completely and deeply. Then one day they sat at a piano for the first time, put their fingers on the keys, and tried to play a simple melody. They would struggle enormously. They might be able to produce individual notes, but the coordination, the feel, the timing, the musicality, all of the things that actually make music would be completely absent. Because playing the piano and understanding music theory, while they are related, are different skills. They use different neural systems, they require different kinds of practice to develop. Language is exactly the same. Understanding English grammar and speaking English fluently are related but different skills. They live in different parts of your brain. They are developed through different kinds of practice, and the one does not automatically produce the other. But here is the thing that keeps learners trapped in the studying cycle forever. Studying feels safe. Studying has clear right and wrong answers. When you complete a grammar exercise, you can check your answers. When you look up a vocabulary word, you either know it or you do not. When you listen to an explanation of a rule, you either understand it or you need to hear it again. Studying gives you feedback that is clean, manageable, and not emotionally threatening. Speaking is completely different. Speaking is messy. Speaking means putting your incomplete, imperfect, sometimes embarrassing English out into the world and dealing with the real human consequences. Speaking means someone might not understand you. Speaking means you might make a mistake in front of another person. Speaking means you are visible, vulnerable, exposed. And because studying feels productive and safe and speaking feels uncertain and threatening, learners default to studying. They tell themselves they will start speaking more when their English is a little better, when they feel a little more ready, when they know just a little more vocabulary, when they have finished this one more textbook. And the tragedy is that more studying does not make speaking less terrifying. It does not build speaking confidence. It does not reduce the freeze, because the freeze is not caused by lack of knowledge. It is caused by lack of automaticity. And automaticity only comes from practice, from speaking. There is only one path out of this trap, and it runs directly through your discomfort. You have to start speaking before you feel ready. And you have to keep speaking through the discomfort until speaking becomes less uncomfortable. That is not motivation talk. That is neuroscience. The brain only builds the automatic neural pathways for speaking by actually speaking. There is no other route. So starting today, your practice needs to shift. Whatever ratio of studying to speaking you currently have, you need to invert it, or at least equalize it. For every hour you spend reading about English, spend at least an hour producing it. For every lesson you watch, practice speaking about the topic of that lesson for an equal amount of time. Stop collecting knowledge and start deploying it. This is the second major insight of this video, and it is the one that has the most immediate practical consequences. Studying builds a bigger storehouse. Speaking builds a better engine, and only the engine actually takes you anywhere. Chapter 3: Why native speakers do not think about grammar, and why you should stop too. I want to start this chapter with a question that might genuinely surprise you when you sit with it. When a native speaker of English says something like this, "I have been working on this project for about 3 weeks now, and I am starting to think we might need to rethink the whole approach. How many grammar rules do you think they are consciously applying while saying that sentence?" The answer is 0. Not 1, 0. Not a single consciously applied rule. Not a single moment where they stopped and thought, now, I need to use the present perfect continuous for this ongoing action that started in the past and continues into the present. I need to add now to emphasize the present relevance. I need to use a gerund here after the verb start because that is the correct complement. I need to use might rather than will to express uncertainty about a future possibility. None of that. The sentence just comes out complete, grammatically correct, naturally paced, without a single conscious grammatical thought. This is not because native speakers are grammar experts who process rules so quickly that we cannot see them doing it. In fact, research consistently and clearly shows that native speakers of English perform quite poorly when tested on explicit grammar knowledge. Ask an educated, articulate, highly literate native speaker of English to explain the rule for when to use the present perfect versus the simple past, and most of them will give you a confused, incomplete, or simply wrong answer. Ask them to explain when to use which versus that in a relative clause, and many will not be able to. Ask them to define the difference between a gerund and a present participle, and most will look at you blankly. They do not know the rules, not consciously, and yet they speak correctly. How? Because they know the patterns, not rules, patterns. They have heard and used these patterns so many thousands upon thousands of times across the entire span of their lives that the patterns have been absorbed into their linguistic neurology at a level below conscious awareness. They know what sounds right in English the way you know what smells like food versus what does not. You cannot articulate the chemistry behind why something smells good. You just know. Your sensory system knows. It has been trained by a lifetime of experience. Native speakers have a lifetime of English pattern experience. The grammar of their language is in their bones, in their habits, in their reflexes, not in their conscious minds. This is what linguists mean when they talk about implicit linguistic knowledge, as opposed to the explicit, conscious, rule-based knowledge that is the focus of classroom grammar instruction. Now compare that to how a typical English learner attempts to construct a sentence in a conversation. They hear a question directed at them. Step 1, they mentally translate the question into their native language to make absolutely sure they have understood it correctly, because understanding it in English alone does not feel secure enough. Step 2, they formulate their answer in their native language because that is where their thinking is most naturally and fluently expressed. Step 3, they begin translating that native language answer into English, word by word or phrase by phrase. Step 4, they run a mental grammar check, scanning the sentence they are building against the grammar rules they have studied. Is the tense right? Does the subject agree with the verb? Is the word order correct for English? Is this the right preposition? Step 5, they attempt to produce the sentence while simultaneously monitoring their pronunciation. Step 6, they watch the face of the person they are speaking with for signs of confusion or judgment. All of this, from hearing the question to producing a response, might take 5, 6, 7, 10 seconds. In the context of natural conversation, that is an eternity. By the time they have finished all of this processing, the conversation has moved, the moment has passed. The other person has jumped in to fill the silence or has moved on to a new topic, and the learner feels once again slow, clumsy, incompetent. This process is not speaking a language, it is performing a live translation exercise, and it will never ever produce fluency. Not because you are not capable of fluency, but because this process is structurally, neurologically incompatible with fluency. Fluency requires speed. Speed requires automaticity. Automaticity requires that the process bypass conscious rule application. And this translation process cannot do that. So what is the alternative? What does it look like to develop the kind of implicit, automatic, pattern-based language knowledge that native speakers have? It looks like massive, meaningful, repeated exposure to the language in context. Not studying rules about the language, experiencing the language, hearing it, reading it, seeing it used in real situations by real people for real communicative purposes, and then producing it, trying to use it yourself, making your brain and mouth work with it under real conditions. When you read a lot of authentic English, your brain, which is the most sophisticated pattern recognition system ever created, starts to absorb the statistical regularities of English. It starts to develop an implicit sense of what sounds right and what sounds wrong. It starts to build up the unconscious grammatical knowledge that native speakers have, not through instruction, but through experience. And when you speak a lot, you train the production side of your brain to access and deploy those patterns automatically, at speed, without conscious management. This is why the most effective language learners in the world, the people who achieve extraordinary fluency in the shortest time, almost universally prioritize massive exposure to authentic content and massive amounts of speaking practice over formal grammar study. Grammar study has a role. It is a small supporting role. The headline act is always exposure and production. Here is something I want you to genuinely think about. You already have more English patterns stored in your brain than you realize. Every time you have read something in English, heard something in English, watched something in English, your brain was absorbing patterns, silently, continuously, without you having to do anything deliberate. The patterns are there. The question is whether you are doing enough production practice to make your brain able to retrieve and use them at speed. That is the work. And it is not grammar study, it is speaking. Chapter 4, The Power of Chunks, How to Speak Faster by Knowing Less. I want to introduce you now to one of the most powerful, most thoroughly researched, and most consistently underused concepts in the entire science of language acquisition. It is a concept that professional linguists and applied language researchers have been writing about for more than 30 years. It is a concept that, when you truly grasp it, will revolutionize your approach to learning to speak English. And yet, it is a concept that almost no traditional language classroom, language textbook, or language learning app has ever properly incorporated. The concept is chunking, and understanding it changes everything. A chunk, in the context of language, is a group of words that native speakers of the language use together so frequently and with such consistent meaning that those words have been stored in the brain not as individual separate items, but as a single unified retrievable unit. They are stored together and retrieved together, the way a phone number or a familiar melody is stored as a complete pattern rather than as a sequence of disconnected pieces. Think about expressions like, "I have no idea." To be honest with you, it depends on the situation. At the end of the day, I was wondering if you could, "As far as I know." What do you mean exactly? I am not sure about that. Let me think about that for a second. The thing is, it turns out that I am looking forward to it. Do you know what I mean? That makes sense. You know what I think. Every one of those is a chunk. Every one of those is stored by fluent speakers as a complete unit, ready to be retrieved and deployed in an instant whole, without any need to assemble the individual words in real time. Here is why this matters so profoundly for speaking fluency. The single biggest enemy of natural, fast, fluent speech is what I call the assembly problem. If every sentence you produce has to be built word by word from raw materials, starting from nothing, retrieving each individual word separately from your mental vocabulary store, and then arranging those words according to grammar rules you are consciously applying, the process will always be too slow, too effortful, too visible in the pauses and hesitations and breakdowns that result. But if a large portion of your speech, not all of it, but a significant portion, is made up of pre-built, prefabricated, ready-to-deploy chunks that you can pull from memory as complete units, your speech becomes dramatically faster, smoother, more natural, and enormously less mentally taxing. You are not building from scratch, you are selecting from inventory, and selecting from inventory is always faster than building from scratch. Linguists who study authentic spoken language have found consistently that a very large proportion of natural fluent speech in any language consists of these prefabricated chunks rather than freshly composed, novel sentences. Native speakers do not invent their language from scratch with every utterance. They draw continuously and heavily from an enormous internal library of stored phrases, expressions, fixed collocations, sentence frames, and discourse patterns. They compose at the level of the chunk, not at the level of the individual word. And most English learners, because they have been taught to think of language as individual vocabulary items combined according to grammar rules, are not building that library. They are approaching every sentence as a construction project when they could be approaching large portions of it as assembly from pre-made components. Consider the difference in cognitive effort between these two approaches to saying the same thing. Approach 1. The learner thinks of the concept of an idea being absent. They search their mental vocabulary for the word idea. They find it. They search for the word no as a negation. They find it. They think about the grammar needed to say this and place the elements in order. They say, "I have no idea." Approach 2. The situation calls for expressing that you do not know something. The chunk "I have no idea" fires from memory as a complete unit. The words leave the mouth together naturally at full speed before conscious thought has had a chance to slow them down. The second approach is what fluent speakers do, always, automatically, without thinking about it. And the reason they do it automatically is that they have heard and used that chunk so many thousands of times that it is essentially a reflex. So how do you build a chunk library large enough to make a real difference in your speaking? The first step is to start noticing chunks in everything you read and hear in English. Right now, you probably read English looking for unfamiliar vocabulary words, individual words you do not know. What you need to add to that attention is a second layer of noticing, groups of words that always seem to travel together. 2-word combinations, 3-word combinations, 4-word combinations that appear repeatedly, expressions that native speakers seem to use as wholes. These are your chunks, and they are everywhere in English once you start looking for them. The second step is to learn chunks as chunks. Do not learn the word depend separately from the word on. Learn it depends on as one unit. Do not learn the word matter separately from the word fact. Learn as a matter of fact as one unit. Store them together because that is how they are used and that is how they need to be retrieved. The third and most important step is to practice using your chunks productively. Recognition is not retrieval. Knowing that a chunk exists when you see it does not mean you can deploy it instantly in speech under pressure. That instant deployment requires that the chunk has been fired, spoken aloud, used in production so many times that it has become a speaking reflex. And the only way to reach that level is practice, repeated, active speaking practice. Linguists working in the area of language pedagogy, including researchers in the tradition of the lexical approach developed by Michael Lewis, suggest that somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 high-frequency chunks covers the vast landscape of everyday conversational English. That is a genuinely manageable number, far more manageable than the tens of thousands of individual vocabulary items that most learners are attempting to master. And mastering 1,000 chunks deeply to the point of automatic, instant, reflexive deployment will do far more for your speaking fluency than superficially knowing 10,000 individual words that you cannot access quickly enough to use in real conversation. The immediate practical takeaway from this chapter is simple. For the next 7 days, every time you read or listen to English, your primary goal is not finding unfamiliar words. Your primary goal is finding chunks, phrases of 2, 3, 4, 5 words that seem to go together as a natural unit. Write them down, practice saying them aloud, use them in sentences, fire them repeatedly until they start to feel automatic. You will be astonished, genuinely astonished, by how quickly your speech starts to feel smoother, faster, and more natural when you are working with chunks instead of individual words. Chapter 5, Listening is not passive, the listening practice that actually builds fluency. There is a deeply appealing story that many English learners tell themselves about their language learning. It goes something like this. I listen to English constantly. I have English podcasts in my earbuds on my commute every morning. I watch English Netflix shows in the evenings. I put on English news radio while I am cooking dinner. I am immersed in the language all the time. Surely all of this listening is building my English fluency. It is a comforting story. It makes the learner feel that the hours they are spending are productive. It makes the process of language learning feel effortless and integrated into daily life rather than demanding and disruptive. And in a narrow sense, it is partially true. Massive exposure to authentic English input over a very long period of time does build vocabulary, does improve pattern recognition, does make native speech more intelligible. There is a real benefit to being surrounded by the language. But here is the uncomfortable truth that most learners do not want to hear, and that most fluency-focused language researchers have been saying for years. Passive listening, the kind of listening where you let the sounds and words flow over and around you while you are doing something else or are only partially attentive, is one of the least efficient forms of language practice available. And in terms of its effect on speaking ability specifically, it is almost negligible. If you have been passively consuming English content for 5 years and you are still not speaking with fluency and confidence, that is your proof. Passive exposure is not the answer. The missing ingredient is not more input. The missing ingredient is active engagement with the input, and active engagement means your brain is working, processing, and most importantly, connecting what it receives to what it needs to produce. Active listening for language development is a fundamentally different activity from passive listening. In active listening, your job is not simply to follow the meaning of what is being communicated. Your job is to notice the language itself at every level. Notice the specific words the speaker chooses and how they are combined. Notice which words get emphasized and which get swallowed. Notice where natural pauses fall. Notice how the speaker manages transitions between ideas. Notice the chunks, the phrases that appear as units. Notice the sounds of English, the way certain words blur together in fast speech, the reductions and contractions that give native speech its characteristic rhythm. And then, critically crucially, the step that transforms listening from passive absorption into actual fluency building, you produce. After you listen, you speak, you repeat what you heard, you respond to what you heard, you use the language you just encountered in your own output. This production step, this closing of the loop from input to output, is what makes active listening powerful. Every time you hear a chunk and then use that chunk in your own speech, you are building a neural connection between the receiving of language and the producing of language. You are shortening the pathway. You are making the language more available, more accessible, more automatic. The most powerful specific technique for this kind of active listening practice is called shadowing, and I want you to understand it deeply and start using it. Shadowing is the practice of listening to a native speaker and speaking along with them or immediately after them, trying to reproduce not just their words but the full texture of their speech, including the rhythm, the pace, the intonation contours, the melody, the way sounds connect and blend across word boundaries. In shadowing, you are not just repeating words, you are training your speaking system at a very deep level. You are retraining the motor patterns of your mouth and voice to operate at native speech rates, which are almost always faster than learners are comfortable with. You are absorbing the prosodic patterns of English, the music of the language, which carries an enormous amount of meaning and which is almost never explicitly taught in classrooms. You are training your ear and your mouth to work together in real time rather than sequentially. Many of the world's most celebrated language learners, the polyglots who achieve genuine fluency in multiple languages, report that shadowing was one of the most transformative techniques in their practice. And there is a growing body of research supporting its effectiveness for both pronunciation and overall speaking fluency. But shadowing is just one powerful form of active listening. There are others that you should add to your practice toolkit. Reaction practice is one of the most practically useful. In reaction practice, you listen to someone expressing an opinion or making an argument in English, and you stop the recording and respond out loud in English in real time. Agree or disagree. Add something, ask a follow-up question, express surprise, correct a factual error. This is the most conversationally realistic form of listening practice because it trains the reactive responsive dimension of speaking, the ability to process what you have heard and generate a relevant response quickly, which is exactly what real conversation requires. Retelling practice is another powerful technique. You listen to a short story, an anecdote, a news item, an explanation of something. You stop, and then you retell it in your own words out loud without looking at anything. This forces you to have truly understood and internalized the content, not just heard it. And the gap between what you heard and what you can say pushes your language system to grow. Dictation practice, where you listen to a passage and write exactly what you hear word for word, is extremely good for training your ear to parse the sounds of real English, including reduced forms, connected speech, and all the other features of authentic pronunciation that classroom English never exposes you to. The principle underlying all of these techniques is the same. Listening is not a resting activity. Listening is research. It is the gathering of material. And the material gathered is only valuable to the extent that you then do something with it, produce something from it, use it to build speaking ability. Every hour of active, production-linked listening is worth 5 hours of passive background exposure, perhaps more. Chapter 6, The Confidence Code. Why confidence is a skill you build, not a feeling you wait for. Let me ask you something with complete directness, the kind of directness that I think you deserve and that will actually help you. How many times across how many months or years of your English learning life have you said to yourself some version of this thought, I will start speaking English more when I feel more confident. I will join that conversation group when my English is a little better. I will speak up in that meeting when I feel more sure of myself. I will try talking to that native speaker when I am more ready. If you are being completely honest, the answer is probably many, many times. And here is why that thought, however natural and understandable it feels, is one of the most self-defeating thoughts an English learner can have. It is built on a false model of how confidence actually works. The common model, the one most of us are operating on without ever questioning it, goes like this. Confidence is a state you achieve by becoming good enough at something. You study, you practice in safe conditions, you gradually improve, and eventually you accumulate enough skill that you start to feel confident. And then that confidence allows you to take on bigger challenges. First the confidence, then the action. This model is wrong, or at least it is backwards. Here is how confidence actually works, and this is not motivational philosophy. This is supported by decades of research in cognitive and behavioral psychology. Confidence is not a prerequisite for action. Confidence is a result of action. Specifically, it is the result of taking action, experiencing some degree of success, and interpreting that success as evidence of growing capability. When you do something that makes you nervous and it goes reasonably well, your brain records that experience. It registers, I tried, I survived, actually something good happened. And the next time a similar situation arises, your brain has that record to draw on. The situation feels slightly less threatening. You are slightly more willing to try. And if that second attempt also goes reasonably well, the record grows stronger. And the situation feels slightly less threatening still, and you are slightly more willing to try again. This is the confidence loop, and it builds in an upward spiral, with each successful attempt making the next attempt slightly easier and slightly more likely to succeed. But here is the catch. The loop only activates when you take the first action, and the first action will always, by definition, come before confidence, because confidence is what the loop builds. It is not what starts the loop. You must step into the loop before you have the confidence that the loop produces. That is not optional. That is the structure of the process. And so anyone who is waiting to feel confident before they start speaking more English is waiting for something that will never arrive through waiting. The confidence they are waiting for can only be built by speaking, which is precisely the thing they are avoiding until they have confidence. This is a trap. And the only way out of the trap is to take the action before you feel ready. I want to distinguish here between the kind of confidence we are talking about and two things it is often confused with. It is not arrogance. Arrogance is the belief that you are better than you are, or better than others. The confidence we are talking about is not that. It is the specific, grounded, evidence-based belief that you are capable of communicating in English well enough to be understood and to connect. Not perfectly, not without mistakes, but functionally, usefully, genuinely. And it is not fearlessness. Fearlessness is the absence of anxiety. Most fluent speakers of a second language still feel some anxiety in challenging speaking situations. They have simply developed the capacity to act despite that anxiety, to speak through the nervousness rather than waiting for it to disappear. The goal is not to eliminate the feeling of anxiety. The goal is to stop allowing that feeling to prevent action. Psychologists use the term self-efficacy for the specific form of confidence we are talking about. Self-efficacy in speaking English means believing I can do this, not perfectly, but well enough. I have evidence from previous attempts that when I try, communication happens, understanding happens, connection happens. I can tolerate the discomfort of imperfection and still succeed in my communicative goal. Building self-efficacy in English speaking is done through what psychologists call graduated exposure, which is a structured approach to gradually expanding your comfort zone through progressively more challenging experiences. You start where your current level of confidence allows, even if that level is very low. Speaking to yourself out loud, recording voice messages that no one will hear, speaking in imaginary conversations. Then you progress to very low-stakes interactions with real people. Language exchange partners in informal, friendly settings, online communities focused on language learning where everyone understands the struggle, brief, simple interactions in English wherever your life provides them. Each of these small acts builds the record of attempted and survived. Each one is a data point that your brain stores as evidence of your growing capability. And over time, gradually and then quite rapidly, the record grows and the confidence grows with it. And the situations that once seemed impossible start to seem manageable and then normal and then easy. But this only happens through doing. And doing requires starting before you are ready. There is no version of this process that does not begin with a step that feels too early. Take this step. Chapter 7, The Pronunciation Trap. Stop trying to sound like a native speaker. Of all the sources of anxiety that weigh on English learners and prevent them from speaking with confidence and frequency, pronunciation anxiety is one of the heaviest and one of the most misguided in its focus. The fear of a foreign accent, the self-consciousness of knowing that your English sounds different from the English of a native speaker from the United States or the United Kingdom, the embarrassment of mispronouncing a word in front of someone who notices, the painful awareness of hearing yourself on a recording and thinking, I sound so foreign, so wrong, so far from where I need to be. And this anxiety pushes learners toward one of two equally counterproductive responses. Some learners become obsessed with perfect pronunciation. They spend enormous amounts of time and energy, sometimes years, trying to eliminate every trace of their native language from their English speech. They target a specific native accent, usually American or British, as their model and measure every deviation from that model as a failure. They record themselves obsessively and listen back with hypercritical ears. They watch the mouths of native speakers on YouTube videos and try to precisely replicate the positions of lips and tongue. They feel deep shame about their accent and allow that shame to be a reason or an excuse for speaking less rather than more. Other learners reach the opposite conclusion. They decide that perfect pronunciation is impossible, that their accent will always mark them as foreign, that the goal is simply unattainable, and that worrying about it at all is a waste of effort. They give up on pronunciation entirely. And while this response at least does not prevent them from speaking, it does mean they miss the genuinely important work of becoming clearly intelligible. Both responses are based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what pronunciation work is actually for and what good pronunciation actually means in the context of modern global English. Let me give you the truth about pronunciation clearly and without any softening. The purpose of pronunciation is intelligibility. Full stop. Nothing else. Your pronunciation does not need to match any specific regional accent of English. It does not need to sound American or British or Australian or any other variety. It does not need to eliminate evidence of your native language. It does not need to fool anyone into thinking you grew up speaking English. What it needs to do is ensure that the sounds you produce are clear enough, distinct enough, and close enough to expected English sounds that listeners can understand you without excessive effort or frequent requests for clarification. That is the bar, and that bar is much lower than most learners believe. And it is also in some ways different from what most learners focus on. Here is something that linguistics research on English as a global lingua franca has established quite clearly over the past 2 decades. Most of the features of pronunciation that learners spend the most time worrying about are not actually the features that most affect intelligibility. Most learners worry primarily about their overall accent, the general sound of their English, the music and color and regional quality of it. But listeners, particularly listeners who are themselves non-native speakers of English, are far more tolerant of accented English than learners assume. What actually causes comprehension breakdowns, what actually makes listeners struggle to understand, is a much smaller and more specific set of features. These include the correct production of consonant contrasts that English distinguishes but some other languages do not. They include proper placement of word stress, making sure the right syllable in a word carries the emphasis. They include maintaining adequate distinction between vowel sounds in stressed positions, particularly in content words, and they include maintaining clear consonant sounds at the beginning and middle of words, which carry more phonological information than final consonants. If you get these features reasonably right, you will be understood reliably by most listeners in most situations. Even if your overall accent is unmistakably from another country, even if every word you say carries the music of your native language, even if no one would ever mistake you for a native English speaker. And here is something important that I want you to carry with you. The world of English today is not a world dominated by native speakers imposing their standard on everyone else. English has grown, over the past several decades, into a genuinely global language used more between non-native speakers than between native ones. A Filipino engineer speaks English with a German architect. A Nigerian professor presents research to an audience from 12 different countries. A Brazilian business person closes a deal with a client in South Korea. None of these people are native speakers of English. None of them expect the other to sound like someone from London or Chicago. They expect, and what they need, is to be understood. And they understand each other because they have achieved that basic standard of intelligibility that pronunciation practice actually needs to target. So stop trying to eliminate your accent. Start making your pronunciation clear. Those are different goals. And only the second one is worth your time and energy. Focus your pronunciation practice on the specific things that matter. Work on the consonant sounds that your native language system does not include and that cause consistent comprehension errors. Work on word stress, which in English is particularly important because stress carries so much meaning. Work on the rhythm and melody of English sentences, which affects how natural your speech sounds to listeners. Work on connected speech, how words link together in fast English, because understanding this makes both your listening comprehension and your own speech more natural. And then let go of the idea that your accent is a problem to be solved. Your accent is evidence of where you have been and who you are. The goal is not to erase that evidence. The goal is to communicate with it clearly, confidently, and effectively. Chapter 8, Real Conversations versus Classroom English, the gap that keeps learners stuck. Here is a question that will make you smile if you let yourself appreciate the irony. When was the last time someone came up to you in a real social or professional situation and said, please choose the correct form of the verb in parentheses in the following sentence and explain your grammatical reasoning? Never. That has never happened to you, and it never will. And yet, that is the basic format of a large proportion of the English practice that millions of learners around the world do every single week. Filling blanks, choosing between options, completing written exercises designed to test knowledge of explicitly taught grammatical rules, all in a slow, written, low-pressure format that has almost nothing in common with the demands of actual spoken communication. The English that most learners have practiced most extensively is classroom English, carefully controlled, logically sequenced, grammatically simple and clear, presented at a pace that allows for reflection and checking. Completely unlike, in almost every important way, the wild, fast, messy, unpredictable, context-dependent, emotionally charged reality of how actual human beings actually talk. This gap between classroom English and real conversational English is one of the most common and most underappreciated reasons why learners who test well in formal assessments, who write competently, who understand academic or literary English without difficulty, can completely fall to pieces in a natural conversation with a native speaker. They have been rigorously trained for the wrong test. Their skills have been developed for a type of English performance that barely exists in the real world. Let me describe for you, in some detail, the ways that real spoken English differs from the English you encounter in most classroom materials, because some of these differences are genuinely shocking once you become aware of them. Real spoken English is dominated by reduced and contracted forms of words and phrases. Native speakers speaking at natural conversational pace do not say I am going to, they say I'm gonna. They do not say I want to, they say I wanna. They do not say let me, they say lemme. They do not say kind of, they say kinda. They do not say do you know what I mean, they say do you know what I mean, or simply ye know what I mean. These are not errors of lazy or uneducated speech. They are the completely natural and normal result of spoken language operating at the speed that conversation requires. And if you have only ever practiced the full, unreduced forms, real native speech will sound to you like it is being delivered at 3 times normal speed by a speaker who is swallowing half their words. Real spoken English is full of what linguists call discourse markers and filler expressions. Well, so, actually, basically, right, look, the thing is, anyway, to be fair, having said that, I guess, sort of, these expressions are not verbal tics or signs of poor communication. They are working parts of natural spoken language. They give speakers time to think. They signal transitions between ideas. They mark attitudes toward what is being said. They create and manage the relationship between speakers. They are the connective tissue of conversation. And learners who have been trained to speak only in grammatically complete, academically appropriate sentences will sound stiff, unnatural, and even slightly mechanical in casual social English. Real spoken English breaks written grammar rules constantly and without apology. Native speakers start sentences with and but, and because. They use sentence fragments. They use they as a singular pronoun when gender is unknown or irrelevant. They end sentences with prepositions without any sense that they are doing anything wrong. They use multiple negatives for emphasis in casual speech. because the grammatical rules that are taught in classrooms are rules for written, formal, edited English. They were never meant to describe spoken language, which has always been different, more flexible, more contextual, more improvisational. Real spoken English depends enormously on context and shared knowledge. Two native speakers who know each other well can communicate enormous amounts of complex information with a very small number of words because they share context, history, references, and implicit understanding. This is why English heard out of context often sounds incomplete or even incoherent when transcribed. So much of the meaning is carried by situation, relationship, tone of voice, gesture, and everything outside the words themselves. Understanding this gap is the first step to bridging it. And the second step is getting as much exposure as possible to genuinely authentic, unscripted English, the kind of English that real people use when they are not performing or presenting but simply talking. Podcasts where people have genuine conversations without scripts, YouTube videos of people talking informally about their lives, interviews where the interviewee goes off topic and speaks naturally, stand-up comedy, which is linguistically rich with culturally embedded, rhythm-dependent, colloquial English at its most alive. And then the third step is practicing producing this kind of English yourself, using filler language intentionally to manage your pauses rather than falling silent when you need a moment to think. Speaking at speed, even when that speed means your pronunciation is less precise than it would be at a slower pace. Interrupting yourself, self-correcting, rephrasing as natural speakers do constantly. Bringing your English down to earth from its textbook altitude into the street-level reality of actual communication. Real conversation is not a performance, it is a joint human activity. And learning to participate in it requires exposure to it in its authentic form and practice of it in its authentic form. Chapter 9, Speaking Practice Without a Partner, How to Train Alone and Make Enormous Progress. I have been speaking to English learners of all backgrounds and levels for many years, and without question, the most frequently offered explanation for not speaking enough English is this one: I do not have anyone to practice with. It is said with a tone that implies the conversation is over, as if the absence of a willing native speaker in one's immediate environment is an insurmountable obstacle, an absolute blocker beyond which progress cannot be made. I understand why it feels that way. It genuinely does. The intuitive model of language learning involves two or more people communicating with each other, and if you do not have a communicating partner, the model seems to break down. But here's the truth that many learners discover, usually by necessity, and that permanently changes their relationship with language practice. You do not need a partner to build fluency, not every day, not at every stage, and in some specifically important ways. Solo speaking practice is actually superior to partner practice for developing certain fundamental aspects of your speaking skill. Partner practice, when you can get it, is invaluable for the realistic, unpredictable, socially situated communication experience that nothing else fully replicates. But between sessions with partners, or for learners who for whatever reason cannot access regular partner practice, solo practice is not a poor substitute. It is a legitimate and powerful approach in its own right. Let me walk you through the most effective solo speaking practice techniques in enough depth and detail that you can actually implement them immediately. The first is self-talk, and it is both the simplest and one of the most underrated techniques available. Self-talk means narrating your life, your thoughts, your observations, and your plans in English out loud. When you wake up in the morning and look at the sky through your window, you say, "It looks like it might rain today. I should probably take an umbrella when I go out. I hope it clears up by the afternoon because I was planning to walk to the market." When you are making dinner, you narrate, "I am going to fry these onions first until they are translucent and starting to get a little golden. Then I will add the garlic and cook that for about a minute before I put in the tomatoes." When you are driving or commuting, you think out loud in English about whatever is on your mind. This continuous low-level stream of English production, if you maintain it throughout your day, adds up to hours of speaking practice with zero logistical overhead. The second technique is the speaking journal. Instead of writing a journal entry, you speak it. You record yourself on your phone or any recording device for 3 to 5 minutes each day. You talk about what happened, what you are thinking about, what you are feeling, what you are planning, what you noticed, what surprised you, what bothered you, what excited you. You do not script it, you simply talk. Over time, listening back to these recordings gives you a genuinely useful window into your own patterns of error and hesitation, and the act of recording itself tends to produce slightly more careful, more monitored speech than true impromptu talk. The third technique is structured monologue practice. You choose a topic, set a timer for 90 seconds or 2 minutes, and you talk about that topic continuously without stopping, even when you struggle, even when you have to repeat yourself, even when the words do not come quickly. The goal of this technique is specifically to train your brain to keep generating English output under time pressure without shutting down. Common productive topics include describing where you grew up, explaining your job to someone who has never heard of it, retelling the plot of a book or film you recently experienced, expressing your opinion on a current event, describing a person you admire, or explaining how to do something practical that you know how to do well. The fourth technique is response practice. You find content in English where someone is expressing opinions, making arguments, or raising questions. A podcast works excellently for this. You stop the recording every 30 to 60 seconds and respond out loud to what you just heard. You agree or disagree, you add an example or a counterexample, you ask a follow-up question that you then attempt to answer yourself, you express emotional reaction to what was said, you correct a factual error if there was one. This technique trains the single most important conversational skill there is, the ability to listen and generate a relevant, timely, appropriate response in real time. The fifth technique is role play and scenario rehearsal. You think about a real conversation you need to have or a type of conversation you want to be more comfortable in, and you practice it. You write a rough script for both sides of the conversation, then you practice it out loud, playing both roles. Then you do it again without the script, improvising. Then you vary the scenario slightly and improvise again. Useful scenarios to practice include job interviews, meetings where you need to present ideas, telephone conversations, difficult conversations where you need to deliver unwelcome news, social situations like being introduced to new people at a party, customer service interactions where you need to make a complaint or request, and any specific professional context relevant to your life. The sixth technique is shadowing, which I described in detail in the chapter on listening, but which belongs equally in the chapter on speaking. Shadowing is the act of finding authentic native speech recordings and speaking along with or immediately after them, imitating not just the words but the full rhythmic, melodic, and prosodic texture of the speech. 5 to 10 minutes of focused shadowing practice daily will produce noticeable improvements in your speaking rhythm, your pronunciation naturalness, and your speech production speed within weeks. None of these techniques require another person. All of them can be done privately at any hour, in any location, with nothing more than your voice and a recording device. And practiced consistently, 30 to 45 minutes of genuine solo speaking practice per day will produce growth in your fluency that will surprise you, and that will make your partner practice when you do have it dramatically more effective. The limiting factor is not opportunity. The limiting factor has never been opportunity. Open your mouth. Begin. Chapter 10, The Speaking Momentum System. How to keep moving forward every single day. We have come a long way together in this video, from the neuroscience of why your brain freezes to the myth of studying as practice, from the power of procedural knowledge and automatic fluency to the chunk-based architecture of natural speech, from the surprising truth about pronunciation to the gap between classroom and real English, from the confidence loop to the full arsenal of solo practice techniques. All of that is real, valuable, important knowledge. But knowledge, as we established in the very first chapter, is not fluency, and a collection of good ideas is not the same as a working system. So in this final chapter, I want to bring everything we have discussed together into one coherent, practical, daily system that you can actually follow. A system built on everything that works and nothing that does not. I call it the speaking momentum system. And the name is not accidental. Momentum is one of the most important and most underappreciated concepts in the entire practice of language learning. When you are moving, when you are practicing regularly, when you are showing up for your English every day without fail, something remarkable happens. Not just the accumulation of practice hours, though that matters enormously, something more than that. The language starts to feel alive in your life. Your brain becomes continuously active in its relationship with English. The gap between encounters with the language shrinks to the point where there essentially is no gap, and everything becomes easier, faster, more natural. When momentum is present, words come to you more readily. Phrases that were once difficult to access are suddenly available. Situations that once caused anxiety feel more familiar, more manageable. Your identity begins to shift, gradually and then quite suddenly, from I am someone who is learning English to I am someone who speaks English. That shift is profound. It changes how you approach situations, how you feel in them, how you perform in them. But momentum is fragile at the beginning and it breaks easily. The worst pattern for a language learner, by far the most destructive, is the start, stop cycle. 2 intense weeks of practice, then a week of nothing, a burst of energy, then a long pause. Every restart costs a disproportionate amount of energy and time because momentum, once broken, must be rebuilt almost from scratch. Every pause allows the neural pathways you have been building to decay slightly. And the combination of restart cost and pathway decay means that inconsistent practice is far less effective hour for hour than consistent practice at a lower intensity. 45 minutes every day beats 5 hours once a week. Always. There is no contest. The speaking momentum system is built on 4 pillars. Each pillar is essential. Each one supports and amplifies the others. Together, they create a complete, self-sustaining system for daily fluency development. The first pillar is daily speaking production. Every single day, without exception, you produce spoken English for a minimum of 30 minutes, not studying, not listening, producing out loud, using any combination of the solo techniques from Chapter 9 or any interaction with a real person or any opportunity your daily life provides. This is the non-negotiable engine of the entire system. If all 4 pillars fell apart and you kept only one, keep this one. Nothing substitutes for it. Nothing replaces it. It is the core. The second pillar is daily active input. Every day you also engage with English in an active, attentive, production-oriented way. You listen to authentic English with full attention, noticing chunks, noticing reductions, noticing patterns. You read English that is slightly above your current comfortable level, pushing your recognition vocabulary toward the edge of your ability. You shadow for 5 or 10 minutes after listening. You respond aloud to what you have consumed. You bring the input into contact with your output rather than keeping them separate. The best speakers are always the best listeners, and they are always building from what they hear. The third pillar is regular real interaction. At least twice a week, ideally 3 times, you practice English in an actual interaction with another person. A language exchange partner online or in person, an English-speaking colleague or acquaintance, an online English tutor for even 1 session per week, a conversation group in your city or online, any genuine human interaction where English is the language of communication. This pillar ensures that the fluency you are building in controlled practice conditions is regularly tested and refined against the full, messy, unpredictable reality of another human being's communication. That testing is irreplaceable. The fourth pillar is weekly reflection and adjustment. Once a week, you spend 10 to 15 minutes honestly and specifically assessing your speaking performance. Where are you improving? What is still breaking down? What specific features of your speech, what specific types of situations, what specific topics still cause you to slow, to freeze, to search, to struggle? Based on that assessment, you adjust the emphasis of your practice for the coming week to target your identified weaknesses rather than simply repeating what you are already comfortable with. This pillar keeps your practice intelligent and adaptive rather than comfortable and stagnant, because always practicing what you are already good at makes you feel good but builds very little that is new. 4 pillars: daily production, daily active input, regular real interaction, weekly reflection and adjustment. Simple, demanding, effective. I want to close with something that I hope will stay with you long after this video ends. The 95% of English learners who never develop the speaking ability they are capable of are not failures. They are not lazy. They are not limited by their intelligence or their talent or their potential. They are simply doing the wrong things with their time and energy. They are studying when they should be speaking. They are collecting knowledge when they should be building habits. They are waiting for readiness that only comes from doing. The 5% who speak well are not special. They are not gifted in ways unavailable to you. They are simply doing the right things consistently over time, with their eyes on fluency rather than on the temporary comfort of the studying zone. You know the right things now. After this video, you cannot claim not to know what works and what does not. The knowledge is yours. What happens next is entirely up to you. The moment this video ends, I want you to do one thing. Just one. Say something in English out loud. Anything, your reaction to this video, a summary of one thing you learned, a question you are still wondering about, a plan you are making for your practice tomorrow. Say it out loud, right now, to yourself, to the room, to whoever might be listening. Because that act, that immediate, imperfect, courageous act of opening your mouth and producing English before you feel completely ready is the exact first step of the momentum that is going to carry you all the way to fluency. Do not wait. Do not study one more thing first. Do not promise yourself you will start properly tomorrow. Speak now. This is the Speaking Momentum channel. We are glad you are here. Keep moving forward. We will see you in the next one. Bonus section, the daily practice blueprint, your first 30 days of speaking momentum. Everything we have discussed across these 10 chapters comes together in one practical question. What do I actually do starting tomorrow morning to begin building real speaking fluency? This bonus section is your answer. A clear, day-by-day, week-by-week blueprint for your first 30 days on the Speaking Momentum system. Not vague advice, specific actions, specific amounts of time, specific techniques. Because vague goals produce vague results and specific goals produce specific progress. Before we go into the daily schedule, I want to say something about perfectionism and this plan. You will not follow it perfectly. On some days, life will intervene. You will be tired. You will be busy. You will simply not feel like it. That is not a reason to give up. That is not a sign that the system is not working. That is Tuesday. That is just being a human being with a complicated life. The response to an imperfect day is not to abandon the plan. It is to do what you can on that day, however little, and return fully to the plan the next day. 5 minutes of speaking on a hard day is infinitely better than 0. The first week of the Speaking Momentum system is about establishing the habit and lowering the resistance to daily speaking practice. In week 1, your target is 15 to 20 minutes of speaking production each day. Not 30, not an hour, 15 minutes. The goal in week 1 is not to make dramatic progress. The goal is to begin, to make opening your mouth and speaking English in English something you do every single day, something that becomes a fixed, expected part of your daily routine, the way brushing your teeth is. How to spend those 15 to 20 minutes in week 1, split them roughly into 3 parts. Spend 5 minutes on self-talk. Narrate your morning routine out loud in English. What you are doing, what you are planning for the day, what you notice around you. Then spend 7 to 10 minutes on structured monologue practice. Pick one of these topics each day. Describe your apartment or house and why you like or do not like it. Talk about your favorite meal and why you love it. Describe a person who has had a significant influence on your life. Explain what your job involves to someone who has never heard of your field. Talk about a place you have traveled to or would like to travel to. Then spend 3 to 5 minutes shadowing from a short audio clip. Find a clip of a native speaker talking naturally on a topic you find interesting. Shadow for 3 to 5 minutes, matching the rhythm and pace of their speech as closely as you can. Also in week 1, begin your active listening habit. Spend 15 minutes each day listening to authentic English with full attention, not as background, not while doing something else. Pick one podcast, one YouTube channel, one audio source that you will use consistently in week 1 so that you are not spending mental energy choosing. Listen, pause every few minutes, say back what you just heard in your own words. Note 2 or 3 chunks or expressions that you want to add to your speaking vocabulary. At the end of each day in week 1, spend just 2 minutes answering this question in your speaking journal. What felt hard today and why? Just 2 minutes recorded on your phone. You do not need to analyze deeply. Just notice, just name it, just speak about it. By the end of week 1, you will have spent roughly 2.5 hours actively speaking English. That may sound small, but for most learners, it will be more deliberate speaking practice than they have done in the past several months, and you will already notice something has shifted. The second week builds on the first and introduces your first real interaction element. In week 2, you increase your daily speaking production to 25 to 30 minutes. You keep the self-talk habit from week 1, building it wherever possible into your daily activities so that it becomes less of a scheduled exercise and more of a continuous background practice. You continue your structured monologue practice, but now you give yourself harder constraints. Instead of talking until the time is up, you set a specific challenge. Talk for 3 minutes on this topic without repeating any word more than twice, or talk for 2 minutes telling a story with a beginning, middle, and end, or explain a process in 5 steps, giving equal time to each step. These constraints push your brain to reach for language it would not otherwise access. In week 2, you also add your first real interaction. Book one language exchange session for the week, or find one opportunity in your real life, however small, to have even a brief exchange in English with another person, a comment on a language learning forum, a short video call with a pen pal, a brief conversation with a colleague who speaks English. One real interaction per week is enough in week 2. The goal is simply to remind yourself that English connects you to actual human beings and to begin building the experience of real communication. Week 2 also introduces your reflection practice. At the end of week 2, spend 15 minutes reviewing your speaking journal recordings from both weeks. What patterns do you notice? What specific words or expressions are you reaching for and not finding? What topics or types of sentences cause the most hesitation? Write these observations down. They are your practice targets for week 3. The third week is where you start to feel the momentum becoming real. By now, the habit of daily speaking is established enough that starting your practice requires less willpower than it did in week 1. Your mouth is in better shape, your brain is more primed, the pathways are beginning to form. In week 3, you increase your daily speaking production to a full 30 to 40 minutes, and you introduce more variety in your techniques. Add reaction practice to your toolkit. 15 minutes of listening to an opinion piece or discussion, pausing regularly, and speaking your response out loud. Add role play practice. Spend 10 minutes 3 times this week in a specific scenario rehearsal relevant to your real life. Also increase your real interaction to twice in week 3. The fourth week is consolidation and intensification. You are now aiming for 45 minutes of daily speaking production. You have a toolkit of techniques you know how to use. You have established the habit. You have begun to accumulate evidence of your growing capability. Week 4 is about pressing that advantage, going harder while the momentum is with you, and beginning to internalize the identity shift from English learner to English speaker. In week 4, you also write yourself a letter, in English, out loud, recorded, addressed to yourself 1 year from now. In that letter, you describe the English speaker you are becoming. You describe the conversations you imagine yourself having, the opportunities you imagine opening, the connections you imagine making. You make promises to your future self about the practice you are committing to. You acknowledge how far you have come in just 4 weeks and what that tells you about what is possible in 4 months, in 1 year, in 2 years. Keep that recording. Listen to it again in 6 months, and then again at the 1-year mark. I promise you, the difference you will hear in your own English will move you in a way that no grade, no certificate, and no test score ever could. Because that difference will be real, it will be yours, it will be the product of genuine, consistent, courageous practice, and it will be only the beginning. Keep speaking, keep growing, keep building the momentum. This is the Speaking Momentum channel, and we are with you every step of the way. A final word from the Speaking Momentum channel. Before you close this video or set down this script, I want to leave you with something that goes beyond technique, beyond systems, beyond the science of language acquisition. Learning to speak a language is one of the most deeply human things a person can do. It is an act of courage. It is an act of reaching. It is the decision to enter a world that is not yet yours and to claim a place in it, one imperfect sentence at a time. Every learner who has ever achieved fluency in a second language did so by being willing to sound wrong before they sounded right, by being willing to be misunderstood before they were understood, by being willing to begin again and again with all the awkwardness and vulnerability that beginning entails. You are not just learning English, you are building a version of yourself that can move through more of the world, that can connect with more people, that can access more opportunities, more ideas, more stories, more relationships. that can stand in a room where English is spoken and feel not like an outsider looking in, but like someone who belongs there. That is worth working for. That is worth showing up for every single day. That is worth the discomfort of speaking before you feel ready, the embarrassment of making mistakes, the effort of pushing through the days when motivation is nowhere to be found. You have everything you need. You have the understanding, you have the system, you have the techniques. What you need now is to begin and to keep beginning day after day with patience and commitment and trust that the effort is compounding even when you cannot see it. The Speaking Momentum channel exists for one reason: to be here with you on that journey, to give you the knowledge, the strategies, the encouragement, and the community to keep moving forward even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. So subscribe if you have not already. Come back for the next video. Bring a friend who is also learning English. Leave a comment telling us where you are in your journey and what you are working on. We read everyone. And most importantly, when this video ends, do not go quietly back to studying. Go out and speak. The world is waiting to hear from you in English. This is the Speaking Momentum channel. Thank you for being here. Keep moving forward.